Hey everybody, this is Will, and in this video, I want to take a look at formatting songs purchased from multitracks.com to prepare to build a worship set. If you are a worship leader and you're using tracks in Ableton Live, then you need to find a way that allows you to have freedom and flexibility with your tracks, but in a way that doesn't take hours, and in a way that gives you stability and still gives you all that flexibility. So what I want to show you today is introduce you to what I call the three-part framework for using tracks. And I'll link to some videos in the description of this where we dive a little deeper. But essentially the three-part framework for using tracks is number one, create a template. And if you want a template to work with to make this easy, you can go to fromstudiotostage.com/template, download for free my free tracks template. And I'm going to use this template to start with, and I'll talk about and compare it to my basic tracks template and my advanced tracks template and show you how they differ a little bit. But start with that template, and then you're going to use that template to format all your songs exactly the same way. So we're going to take a song purchased from multitracks, and I'm going to show you how to format it so that, again, you can have freedom and flexibility and you can build a set efficiently. And then number three, you're going to take that same template that we formatted our songs with. We're going to take our formatted songs, drag them back into our template to create a set. So our three-part framework for using tracks is create a template, format all our songs the same, and then build a set of those formatted songs using our template. So again, for the sake of this video, download that template from studiotostage.com/template. It's free. It's our free tracks template. It's going to help you format your tracks, purchase from multitracks.com, so that when you go to build your set, they just drop right in and you can build it very quickly. And again, still have freedom and flexibility and stability. So let's dive into this for today. I'm going to do a separate video talking about content from Loop Community, Praise Charts, as well as some other places, and show you how to format those. But for the sake of this example and for the sake of today, I'm going to be using content I purchased from multitracks.com, and we're going to be using Phil Wickham's Battle Belongs track. Okay, so this is Battle Belongs, Hymn of Heaven, key of D flat, 81 BPM. That is the song we'll be using for today, but the process is really the same exact process no matter what multi-track you have. And I'll mention a few fun things along the way. Again, the goal of all of this is so that we can have freedom and flexibility and eventually build a set. So again, first thing I'll mention, download that free tracks template if you haven't already from studiotostage.com/template. And the very first thing I'm going to do in live is go to preferences, which is Command comma. This is super important. And you're going to want to do this on every computer that you build sets on the first time. You just have to do it once, but you want to go through and make sure you've done this on every computer that you're going to potentially run tracks on and build sets on. So I'm going to go into preferences. I want to go to record warp launch. And there's one setting that's super important that we make sure is disabled. It's under the warp fade section, and it's called auto warp long samples. We want to turn that off. Now, I've talked in plenty of detail before about warping, what it is, why Live uses it. But when we disable this setting, we're basically telling Live, hey, we don't want you to guess what the tempo is for our tracks. We are going to bring our tracks in. We're going to decide if we want to warp them. And if and when we do, we're going to tell you what tempo to warp them at. So that's super important before you drag any content into your live set. So let's close our preferences window here. We've got that disabled. One of the really cool things about when you purchase content from multitracks, and actually let me go to Finder here and I'll show you what this looks like. So if I go into this folder, when I purchased this multitrack from multitracks.com, what I get is a folder, and within that folder, I get a live set and I get a folder of stems. Now, I did a previous video where I talked about, as a worship leader, should you buy your content from multitracks, from Loop Community, Praise Charts, where should you get your content? And essentially the point of that video, 25 minutes worth of a video, was if you're going to use tracks in Ableton Live, as a worship leader, purchase them from multitracks.com. And here's the big reason, and I say this in that video and I'll show you now, is with everyone else, Loop Community, Praise Charts, you get a folder full of stems, and that's great. And stuff from Loop Community is the original recording as well too, if you purchase that as opposed to a community track or a premium track. So you can still get the original recording. But what's really nice that multitracks does is instead of just these stems, I also get an Ableton Live set. So I'm gonna actually double click and open this Ableton Live set up. And you'll see when this loads, there's a couple unique things that are here. One, all our stems are loaded in. They're color coded, really nicely. Now, personally for me, that doesn't matter. I don't care about the color coding. I'm actually going to change it and do it a different way. And we'll show you after we go through formatting loop community files and multitracks files, praise charts files. I'll show you how to eventually build a set using that content. And I'll add that video to the description of this video once it's created. But once I get to the end, these colors change. So that's not a big deal for me. But what is a big deal is the fact that they're already loaded in, they're named, that I get locators, I get time signature changes if that such a thing exists, and I get all my tempo automation already added to my live set. So that's a big benefit of purchasing content from multitracks.com, is it comes in a Ableton Live set ready to go. So let's walk through this process and I'll show you all the different things I do to my live files. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select all of my tracks. I'm going to select the bottom one, hold shift, select the top one, and I'm going to enable warp. And that is maybe a slightly controversial thing. Some people don't enable warp because they feel like it's going to mess with their CPU. And in theory, enabling warp could increase your CPU, but I never, ever once, I was just texting with someone a couple days ago that asked about warping. And I told him I never once have had a CPU related issue that was tied to warping. I've had CPU related issues to a computer that was way too slow for running tracks, but it had nothing to do with warping. Warping was not the thing that was putting it over the limit. It was the fact my computer was way too slow. So I enable warping. The next thing I do is I change this to complex. Complex is the best warp mode when you're working with full songs. And warp mode basically means you're telling Live, what type of content is this? How do I want you to, what algorithm do I want you to use to interpolate? Let's use that word. I don't know if that's the right word, but to play back this content, use this particular algorithm, use this particular what's called warp mode in order to make that happen. Now, what's really, really cool about using content from multitracks is in order to warp all my stems, all I have to do is select my content and enable warp. That's literally it. Now I go a step further and I zoom in here at the beginning and I don't go super far. I know a lot of people that when they do this, they like go this far and they lose their mind and they go crazy. Don't do that. But I zoom in just enough to make sure that my warp marker that's right here over this first click is correct. And then I go to the end of my song and I go, let's make sure we're still in time here. Because a lot of times you'll get to the end of a song and the song, the artist has like a retard at the end, the classic bucket of fish thing, right? And so I want to make sure that this is lined up. And we'll talk about kind of what to do if a song is not lined up. I have a second song to show as an example here in a second. But this song looks pretty good. Now, one thing I do, this is just something I do out of habit, is I go to the last downbeat of the last measure here. I move my mouse over what's called a pseudo warp marker, and I double click to create a warp marker. Okay. And essentially what that does, what those warp markers do is they pin my audio to a specific place on the timeline so that it doesn't stretch, further or in. Now, to the point of warping, again, I mentioned, I have some really great warping tutorials that I'll share later where I talk about warping, why to warp and why that's beneficial. But for me in particular, goes back to freedom and flexibility. I want to be able to change tempo. I want to be able to change key. I want to make sure that all my stems are synced up to the grid perfectly so that when I select the bridge here and I press play, that it's going to jump to that bridge. Okay. One other note I'll mention, I'm going to try to not play this track back a lot just for the sake of YouTube, because the YouTube piracy gods get very angry when you play back copyrighted content. So I may play portions of this, but you actually don't really have to hear much of any of this to format it. And I'll show you that. But for me, it's super important that when I click on bridge, I know that I'm going to the bridge. And when I click on verse or vamp, whatever this is here, vamp, that I know that I'm going to the vamp. And if your content's unwarped, it's possible that you have 81 BPM entered in for your song, but the song that as it's recorded was maybe at like 80.2 BPM. And in fact, that's one of my pet peeves is when a song is recorded at 72.1 BPM or something really silly, is I just change the BPM. I warp the content and then I change the BPM to be a whole number, to be whatever I want it to be. Okay, so we've warped our content. We've added our warp markers. We've changed our warp mode to complex. The next thing I want to do is I want to lock in my tempo. Okay. I want my tempo to be the correct tempo. And here's the thing with tempo. Our tempo and Live's arrangement view can be controlled a couple different ways. One, up here in the left-hand corner is Live's global tempo. So we could type in and change this from 81 to 90. Because my stems are warped, I could press play and that would play at 90. Again, you can't hear that now because I don't want to upset the YouTube gods. But at 81 BPM, that's controlling my tempo. The other way you can control tempo is here in the master track. So if I open this up, I press A, let's enable automation mode. You could see song tempo. You could actually go into your master track here and automate your tempo, do some fun stuff. That's a nice way to do tempo. The downside to both of those approaches, both Live's global tempo and automating in our master track, is if I go and take this song and bring it into another set, and remember that's part 3 of the 3-part framework for using tracks. Create a template. We're using our free tracks template. 2, format your song using that template. We're working through that now. But then 3, we want to eventually build a set using this song. And if I drag this song as is into a new Ableton Live set, it's not going to maintain its tempo of 81 BPM, no matter if I enter that here or if I draw that into the master tempo. And what I see a lot of people do is, unfortunately, they drag their song in and then they go to their master tempo and they draw in a lot of tempo automation and they're just wasting a lot of time. So what I do in order to save time is I discovered this trick where I use what's called a tempo track. Okay. And this is the way this works. So I'm going to go back over to Live's browser. I'm going to go to my free tracks template. Again, as I mentioned, I know I'm beating this horse to death, but go to FromStudioStage.com/template to download this for free. And I'm going to click the arrow to the left of my live set. And I'm going to click the arrow, or excuse me, my live project, click the arrow to the left of my live set. Then I'm going to click the arrow to the left of this track here that says tempo. And you see tempo, enter tempo, and segment BPM. I'm going to take this clip. I'm just going to drag it here. Then I want to drag it to go the entire length of my set. So you can see, let's zoom in a little bit. We get this little bracket looking thing here. I'm going to click and start dragging. And while I'm dragging, let's zoom back out. While I'm dragging, I'm going to hold down minus to zoom out to see the entire set. And I'm going to drag it the entire length of the song. Even if I go past it, that's fine. So let's even go past, let's go and measure past it. But I want to make sure that my tempo track here runs the entire length of my song. Now I'm going to double click on my tempo clip and you could see it's already warped here. And on this clip, we have this BPM box, this segment BPM box. You may have noticed this little note here on the clip that says enter tempo and segment BPM. So what I'm going to do, my tempo is 81. I'm going to click in this box. I'm going to type 81. If for some reason, because this is a weird bug I've seen in, I think some versions of 10, Live 10 and Live 11, if you go to type it in this box and you can't, then click tab to go to session view, click tab to come back. And that typically lets you type in the box. So weird kind of quirk, but that's a way around it that I've found. So I'm going to type in 81 into my BPM here. And then I'm going to click this where it says follow. We'll zoom in so you can see this a little bit more, a little better. We'll click follow and change that to lead. And what that means, this was updated, I believe, in Live 11. The terminology used to be slave and you would click it and it would turn to master. The terminology now in Live 11 is follower. And when you click it, it turns to lead. And what this basically means is in Live's arrangement view, we have a third way to set our tempo, and that's to use an audio clip and set it to be the master tempo or the lead tempo for our audio file. So now what you can see, our tempo up here in the Live's global tempo is grayed out because our tempo is being controlled by this clip that has been set to lead. Okay. And what's great about this, when I use a tempo clip in Ableton Live's arrangement view like this, and I save it in my live file, if I go to drag that file, that Ableton set, into a new set, this clip is going to define the tempo for me. So with this tempo clip loaded into my set, I don't have to go in and rewrite my tempo automation every time I build a new set. I don't have to change my Live's global tempo as I change songs. That's going to save my tempo with this particular song so that when I go to build my set, remember step 3, part 3 of the 3-part framework, it's going to have the tempo saved with it. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is move this up. I'm going to drag this up to the top of my file here. Okay, so that's going to go above my click track because the other thing I'm going to be using my template for is to format all of my songs, right? And I want them to follow all of the same formatting. So we've got our tempo track, and the next thing I want to do is unfortunately this live file, it's great. It's got all these locators in here. This is super helpful. This is great. It saves me time from having to create locators, but similarly, let's try that again, to our tempo, those locators don't go and transfer between files. So if I go to open this live set in another live set, those locators aren't going to come with it. But alas, I have found a solution that I've used for years that's worked really well for me. And that's using what I call a markers track. So in order to do this, what I'm going to do is take this markers track here, and I'm going to drag this in right below my tempo track. Now, all my markers tracks is a MIDI track, and there's nothing in it right now. If you look at this, I mean, it's just a MIDI track. There's no devices. Live is telling us, in fact, to drop an instrument or sample here, because it's saying there's nothing here. And what we're going to do is we're going to create what's called a dummy MIDI clip, and we're going to splice that up so that we can store our locator information in a marker clip, okay, what I call a markers track. So here's how we're going to do this. I'm going to walk through this process a couple times. I'm going to go pretty slow. I also have a tutorial where I walk through this. That's like a separate kind of isolated tutorial where I show you how to do this. And so I'm going to make a note to share that, as well as my tempo track tutorial that shows you how to do this, just in case you need a little further deep dive. But I'm going to walk through this slowly. Here's the thing I encourage you. I love teaching people this live when I show up in person to help train churches and show them how to do this over the span of 2 days. We do this all together. And as you start to do this, you go a little slow, then you go faster. And it's a really fun, kind of satisfying process, because once you learn the steps and the keyboard commands, it's really, really fun. You'll see what I'm talking about here in a second. Now, pay close attention, because every time I do this, someone misses a step live, and I go super slow and I like stress the point, but someone always misses it. So go step by step, slow down, watch me, and then try it. Okay, so we've got our markers track loaded in. Again, our markers track is a MIDI track up here. There's nothing in it. It's blank. I'm going to click this show hide button to expand my track. Okay, so I'm going to click this button here to expand my track. All right, so step one is click this button to expand my track. Now, I'm going to start at the very end of the song, past when the song ends, and I'm going to click and I'm going to drag the entire length of the song. Okay, so you basically see I've highlighted from the end of the song and making sure I've gone past all the stems. I just kind of followed the tempo track there, and I highlighted all the way to the beginning. Now, some of you missed step one, which is where I said follow step by step, and you're going, but Will, I can't highlight. It's not letting me. So I'll go back and again remind you, expand your track. Click this arrow here to expand your track, and then select from the end of your song all the way to the beginning. Okay. Next, we're going to create a MIDI clip, and we're going to use our keyboard shortcut to do this. So if you're on a Mac, it's Command Shift M. If you're on a PC, it's Control Shift M. Okay. That's going to create a MIDI clip. So at this point, we've expanded our track. We've selected from the end to the beginning, and we've created a MIDI clip. Here is the fun part of this. And this is the thing where there's some specific keyboard shortcuts that when I'm live and in person showing people this, it's super fun to teach. And you start to get kind of muscle memory and just crank through them. So let's walk through these. So I'm going to go ahead, zoom into the beginning of my file. There's a fun, not necessarily, I guess it's a bug at the beginning of your file though, to where you can't see the name of your first locator. So when I zoom in, I just click there and it cleans up and says count off. And I think most multitracks files probably start with a count off section. So that's probably what that is. So for my very first marker clip, for my very first section here, it's going to be different than everything else. I'm going to click on the clip itself. I'm going to do Command R or Control R if I'm on a PC, and I'm going to type count off. I'm just copying what is there. Okay. So Command R to rename, I type count off, and I'm going to hit enter. Okay. So at this point, we named our very first clip. Now, from this point forward, the process is going to be different, and it's going to go super quick. And I'm going to walk you through each one of those keyboard shortcuts to show you how simple it is to do this. So now remember, we expanded our track so that we could see it. So make sure you keep it expanded. And then what I'm going to do is click right where the locator for the next section and this clip kind of intersect. Okay. So right here, and I'm going to do Command E. If I'm on a PC, it's Control E, and that is our split command. Command E which is our split command. Okay, Command E or Control E if you're on a PC. Now listen very carefully. We'll walk through this process a few times, but this is the start of the keyboard shortcuts that we want to remember and to repeat. So now we're going to press our right arrow over 1. Okay, our right arrow over 1. Then we're going to do Command R. Okay, and we're going to type intro, which is the section we're on. Then we're going to hit enter. Okay, so I did Command D to split. And then I use my right arrow over 1, Command R to rename, and then enter. Now, this is where it starts to be super fun. I'm going to hold Alt Option and right arrow, and that's going to jump me to my next locator. Okay. So my cursor was here. I'm going to do Alt Option and right arrow. That's going to jump me to my next locator. Now, we restart that whole process over again, those whole section of keyboard shortcuts again, and we're going to keep repeating them. So let's go through them again. At the very beginning, Command D, that's going to split our clip. Right arrow over 1, that's going to move us off of that locator. Command R, which lets us rename, and then we're just going to match what that locator name is up there. We're going to hit enter, so verse 1, and then we go to our final keyboard shortcut, which is Alt Option, right arrow. Okay, so it's the Option key, Alt key, and right arrow. Then do it again. Command D, arrow over 1, type it in, and then Option right arrow, and you go to your next one. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to work throughout my song here, and I'm going to take and split my clip, and it's going to match perfectly the name of the song section above. Now, one of my favorite things about this, you may get into a song to where multitracks has called it a vamp or a tag or something. And for you, that's not a term, that's not terminology you use. This is an opportunity for you to rename that. Now, you'll also have to tweak the guide cue if you want to, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But this is a great opportunity for you to name this whatever you want to, or to also leave like notes. So let's say verse 4 is a breakdown. I could say verse 4 breakdown, right? And add that note in to match that locator. So now I'm going to continue just going throughout this song, and I'm going to split these up. And this is something that I encourage you to do, you know, while you're sitting on your couch watching Netflix, right? And so you just kind of go through, it's pretty mindless. You don't really have to think about it. One other thing I always tell people, when you get to the bridge, don't rename, because typically multitrack splits up the bridge to oblivion, you know, tons of bridges. So you don't have to rename if you see that it's the same name as the section before. And the other thing is you could take this and in this moment, combine things. So if there's like 5 bridges and you really only want it to be 1 bridge, then you can just go through and instead of doing 5, you can do 1. Okay. So we're finally at our ending here, and we have everything separated. So let's hit Command S. Actually, I'm going to wait on that. I don't want to talk about that message quite yet. But you see, we've got all of these split right here. So I've got a clip that has been separated, that's been split, that matches every single one of my locators. And now what that means is when I drag this song from this set into a new Ableton Live set, then that means that that locator name, that marker name is going to come with it. So I'm going to know exactly where I am. And you'll see as we format other songs, like from Loop Community Praise Charts, places that don't give us our live set, having those locators already named is saving us tons and tons of time. So let's keep going. Let's keep moving through this. So we've got our tempo track. We've got our markers track loaded in. Now, one thing that this live file includes is it does include a click track. And this click track, fun fact, this uses the default classic sound from my Foundations click. So every one of the multitracks sessions that you download, the sound that's included is the Foundation sound. They started doing that back before, I think it was before, right when I started working for multitracks. When I worked for multitracks, they use that Foundation sound for all of their multitracks. So you can replace it and use whatever. I don't use the click sound that's included, the audio clip that's included with the multi-track session, because I use what's called Foundations. It's a multi-sound subdividable click for Ableton Live. It's a MIDI click. Let me show you how that works, right? If you're going to keep your click track, if you're going to keep multi-tracks click track, then you just want to make sure it follows the formatting of your template. Okay. So if you're not going to do what I do, which is use a MIDI click, then what I would suggest is use the free tracks template here. And you can see click is the very first file. So I'm going to drag this into the top, and I'm just going to take multitracks audio click, and I'm going to move that up. Okay. Because what's super important is that the formatting of our song here perfectly matches the formatting of our template that we have here, our free tracks template. So if you're using the free tracks template, you would do that. But like I said, I use foundations, which is a MIDI click, subdividable click. And I'm going to show you how I would do that if I was formatting the song the way I format the song. So I would go into either my basic tracks template or my advanced tracks template, because both of them include foundations. Click the arrow to the left of the live set and the arrow to the left of the track here that says click. And this song is in 4/4. So I'm going to start. We'll scroll all the way down. This makes this a little easier. And we're going to say just quarters and eighths because I don't need 16th notes. I'm going to drag this 4/4 clip and I'm going to make it the entire length of my song. Now I know there's some time signature changes in here and we'll talk about how to deal with those in just a moment. Okay, so if there were no time signature changes and my song was just 4/4, then I would leave this click just the way it is. And I want to show you, let me go ahead and I'm going to turn on audio for this computer. 1 second. All right, so let's get audio turned on. We're going to solo our click because I do want you to hear this, and I'll show you some of the flexibility with foundations. So we'll turn that on. That's super loud. Let me turn that down. 1 second here. Okay, that should be a little better. And let's turn this down here as well, so it's not crazy loud. Okay, so if I press play here, we're just listening to foundations. Okay, and I can adjust the volume of the eighth notes. I can bring that down. I can turn my accent on or off. I prefer an accented click, but I can also change the click type if I want to, and then can adjust my click volume. For me, I found that to be super helpful, particularly in a multi-site church environment, to where I'm using the same song across multiple campuses with different drummers. I want to make sure that I have a consistent click across every single one of my songs. That's super important. So when I'm formatting my songs for multitracks, loop community, whatever, I want them to all have the same click track sound, not the one that's included with the file. You could do that if you want to, but to me, it's super important that they all have the same exact click sound included, and using foundations lets me have an accent and it lets me subdivide the click as well too. So now let me talk about if I'm continuing with foundations, and if you're not, just skip ahead or just hang out. But we have a time signature change here of 2/4. So what I'm going to do if I'm using foundations is I'm going to go and drop in my 2/4 clip here, and then we start back with 4/4. And what I do just to make sure I get my my accent correct is then I go back and I start and drag 4/4 out. Now you see I used the wrong clip here. I selected 4/4. I'm going to do 4/4 just quarters and eighths. So add that back in, and then we'll keep dragging. I'll hold minus to zoom out, and I'm going to drag until I see my next time signature change. There it is. Okay, and it's 2/4. You could go in, and if you're using an audio click, you could edit, for instance, your click to just have a measure 2 and then restart 4. Like you could fake it that way if you wanted to. But I'm just showing you if I'm using foundations and if I'm doing this and formatting the song for me, for my team that's going to play with this, use this on stage. This is how I would do it. Okay, there's my final section here. You could, I guess, technically still skip 2/4. Like you're not going to be too far off beat. It's still 4. It's still quarter notes kind of as our base. So it's not going to be awful. It's not like we're going from 4 to 6 and back or whatever. But this is what I do. So I keep my accent in time. And then super important, if you're using a MIDI click or something different, is make sure you stop your click when your original click stops. Okay. So if you see here, it stops on ending. So I'm just going to move this back to where this stops at the ending as well too. Okay. So if I'm doing foundations, that's what that's going to look like. And I'm going to move this up to the top, and I'm going to make it the top thing because I want it to match the formatting that I have here. And again, if I was using foundations, I would not use this audio click. I would actually leave it here, and I would just make sure I turn that off so that I don't use that. And actually, before I forget, we're going to mute that computer back. So if I was using foundations or a MIDI click, I would leave this here, and I would turn off that click track. But That's how I do foundations. For the sake of this though, I'm going to delete all that work, which is sad. It's such a fantastic product. It's a fantastic solution. I'll include the link. I'm making a note here to include the link to foundations if you're interested in purchasing that, as well as the basic tracks template, advanced tracks template that includes that. But for the sake of this, we're going to use our click track, which is just an audio track from our free tracks template. And then I'm going to start paying attention and looking at my tracks formatting because we're getting close to the end here. We're close to the end of this process. So we have click, we have tempo, guide. Guide is my next track. Okay. So guide here is a audio track. So we're going to do click, tempo, guide. And included with our tracks template is a bunch of pre-recorded audio clips that you can use to add, for instance, 1, 2, 3, 4 verse, different sections if you wanted to. So if I was doing this from scratch, now my multitracks file does have cues included with it. But if I wanted to, for example, and I wanted to build out, say our verse, our next section would be going into our verse 1 here, then what I could do is zoom in, go to the measure before that section. And let's say I could build this out and customize this and say, let's make it verse, and then we'll count. I know a lot of people that like this. I personally don't like this. It's too much talking for me, but I could do verse 2, 3, 4 if I wanted, right? I'll let you hear what that sounds like. Solo that out, verse 2, 3, 4. Actually, let's turn the volume on so that you can hear it. And then we'll try that again. Verse 2, 3, 4. Okay. Turn our volume up again, as to not upset the YouTube gods. So you have all of these cue files. If you want to build out cues, if you want to add counts to that, if you don't have them in the song you're working with, the multitrack file you're working with. But multitracks already gives us a guide. So I'm going to start with that as a starting place. And I'm just going to move their guide up here. Okay. I'm going to put it in my track because I want it to follow the formatting. If you change the formatting of your template to be, let's say, I know a lot of people that put markers first, markers, click, tempo, blah, blah, blah. That's perfectly fine. There's no magic to the formatting, but where the magic happens is that your template has the formatting defined and every single one of your tracks follows that format, if that makes sense. Okay. So back to our file here. Our guide cue is loaded in. Again, if I wanted to stack some of these and say, let's add 2, 3, 4 on top of this, we could. It's a different voice, but we could do that. But let's start to wrap this up. We're getting really close to the end here. So we have click and we have click. Okay. We have tempo. We have tempo. We have guide. We have guide. We have markers, and then we have one final track here. I'm not going to use this for this one, but this is original track. Okay. So this would be if I was doing like some Pro Presenter automation and I was programming MIDI cues and I wanted to have the original audio, the original MP3 of this song loaded into my set for reference. I personally find this super helpful. I find it not just helpful, but a necessity if I'm doing MIDI automation programming, if I'm doing lighting automation programming. I need to have the original track to reference lyrics, particularly for, again, Pro Presenter and lyric automation, but it's not a necessity. So for the sake of this video, I'm going to leave it out. Maybe I'll do, let me know. I feel like a real YouTuber now. If you want to see me bring the original track in and sync it up, leave a comment in this video. If you made it 33 minutes into this video and you're still following along, you want to see the original track synced up and loaded in, let me know. We could do a separate shorter video showing how to sync that up. But for the sake of now, I'm going to load it in. And the reason I'm loading it in is it's super important. This is my template I'm going to use to build my set with eventually. So it's super, super important that each one of these files that I've formatted follow the template and the structure of this template exactly, like perfectly correct. Okay. So again, I'll look one more time, click, click, tempo, tempo, guide, guide, markers, markers, original track. Again, even though I have no original track in there, if I'm ever going to have an original track, I need the spot and the place for it. Okay. A couple final things we'll do here and then we're done. So I'm going to take all of my tracks now. I'm going to leave this click track and guide, even though there's nothing in it. I'm going to just disable them. If I was you, I would probably delete them, but I need to use this session for some other teaching things. So I'm going to leave them in place so I can move it back if I wanted to. But one thing I want to mention here that's super important. It's very likely you're looking at this and you're going, but Will, we're never going to have 9 electric parts. Or we're never ever going to use the drum parts here. I understand. I agree with you. You're never going to have 9 parts on stage. You're never going to have, very likely you'll have drums, so you don't need it. But what you do not want to do is go in and go to your drums and delete it. Okay. So I'm going to bring that back before I forget. You don't want to delete drums, but what you want to do is click on the number next to the name, which is called a track activator, and you want to disable that track. Here's the reason why that's super important. I want to have access to drums so that if I'm in rehearsal and I need to reference the drum part for some reason, I can solo that drum part here, and the drummer wants to know what the drums did in that section, and I can play the drums from that section to show the drummer what that is. Or let's say we normally have our bass player. Let's say, God forbid, our bass player couldn't be there on Sunday morning and we suddenly need to unmute the bass part. I don't want to have to go run up to a studio, go into Logic, go somewhere, on a network drive to re-download a file to add a wave or stem back into my session. Again, if you do this right and format things properly, and you're not building a master set, and you again follow part 3, which is to build a set using your formatted content, and you do that every week, you're not going to run into issues having all of these stems. It may seem like a lot, and you may go, but Will, I've been deleting stems for the sake of CPU. It's okay. Leave your stems there. It's going to be perfectly fine. So what you may want to do now is go through and say, we typically have bass, so we'll mute bass. We typically have acoustic, so we'll mute acoustic. Again, don't delete it, just mute it. So click your button here, track activator button, to delete it. Maybe you go, we don't like using pre-recorded vocal stuff, so we'll turn that off. We'll turn off this vocal chop thing. Now, the last piece of this that we're going to do is I'm going to select all the multi-track stems that came into this. Okay, so I'm going to select all of the tracks, and I'm going to click the first one. I'm going to hold shift to select the last one. And then I'm going to do Command G, which is our group command. If you're on a PC, it's Control G, but I'm going to do Command G. And then I'm going to click on that group track, and I'm going to do Command R to rename it. And this song is Battle Belongs. You can use this to do whatever you want to, but I'm going to put the key, D flat, and the tempo, 81 BPM. Okay. Now, while that's selected, I can press minus to collapse that. And you start to see it's a really clean looking session. Like, it's not overwhelming. Now, you may look at this and go, this stuff up here is super overwhelming. I get that. But I think the more you use this, the more you'll get used to that, and you'll feel comfortable with this, because what you'll start to see is every single one of our songs that we work with is going to be formatted exactly the same way. So we open this song up, we open another song up, and it's going to look exactly the same way. It's going to be formatted exactly the same way. So we've got our songs grouped up here, and we've got our stems grouped up. Everything looks really good. Now I'm going to go ahead and save, but there's one final thing I need to do before we're done here. So I'm going to hit save, Command S, and you're going to get this error message, which no need to fret, no need to fear. It's going to say the live set you're trying to save was created with a version of live that is either older or has fewer features. To avoid incompatibilities, please save your set as a new file. What this means is this file, I believe multitracks creates files in Live 9, if I remember correctly. If you're using Live 9.5, Live 10, 10.1, 11, or let's say 5 years from now, you're watching this and you're using Live 15, if such a thing exists, then this session is, you're going to get this message. And this message basically means your version is newer than the version that was created with that. And that's to avoid compatibility issues, so that if you were to format this and try to open, save it in Live 11, try to open in Live 9, it's not going to work, right? So what I'm going to do is, let's go back here. We're just going to do save as, just like it says, which is fine. I'm going to save this on my desktop. I'm going to get out of this folder, because this folder doesn't matter to me now. I'm going to put this on the desktop, and I'm going to name this however I want to. Battle Belongs, but I want to be consistent with this so it matches the naming convention I use for all my stems. 81, and we'll do BPM. And I'm going to hit save. Now, it's super important that you don't save this in that original multitracks folder. In the original multitracks live project, you save it separately from that. And then it's even more important that you do this. So we're going to move our file. We're going to use our file in different places. So it's super important we go up to File and do Collect All and Save and hit OK. And what that's going to do is it's going to go look on our computer, find every single place that files from this session were referenced. So audio clips, the original multi-track session, and it's going to take those and bring them all into a live project. So if I show you the Finder here, We save this here, Battle Belongs. And because I did collect all and save, I've got this live set, I've got a live project folder, but now I have this multitracks folder that has everything that was included. And I have this samples folder, which is everything else I added to this. And it's super important when I go to share this file, when I go to move this to a new computer, that I move this project folder. And I go a step further, a little old school in this. I right click and I compress this to make this a zip file. And I do that just to make sure that nothing gets moved or shifted around when I transfer from one computer to the next. But it's super important when you go to share this, you use this project folder and not this live set folder. Okay, final thing we have to do is think about our audio. We want to think about our audio routing and how we're going to handle that. And I don't have the time today because we're already at 40 minutes for this tutorial to walk through and talk about why I use sends and returns. But what I will do, I'm going to make a note here to include links to a couple tutorials where I talk about sends and returns. But I want to show you the final step of the process here, which is I create return tracks, and I'm going to double click in here and make sure my return tracks don't have audio on them, which they don't. And my default template, we're just going to insert 2 more return tracks here. So I'm going to create insert return track. We'll hit save. So those get saved. But my default template, this free tracks template, comes with 4 return tracks. And I'm essentially using, again, I don't have time to go in depth on this, but I'm essentially using those return tracks to equal outputs on my interface. So the final thing I'm going to do is go into my file here, and I'm going to go ahead and pre-route. My click is external out 1. My guide is external out 1, which is great. And then I'm going to go through and route audio from my stems here, from my song to my return tracks. Now, I'm not particularly concerned with routing my return tracks in my file to outputs because that's already done in my template. But I'm going to go ahead and choose which output I want them to go into. So I like doing this in session view personally. So I'm going to click this arrow here to expand my group track. I'm not using my click and guide. Those are disabled, so I'm not worrying about it. But I am going to go through every one of my tracks, even if they are the track activator is turned off. And I'm going to go ahead and turn up a send knob to send them to a specific output. Now you want to think about your groupings. In this particular case, I have 4 return tracks. I have click and guide being directly routed. Then I have 4 return tracks. How do I want to group those out? Those 4 different things. So I'm just going to arbitrarily pick something here. You don't have to necessarily stick to that as a way to group and kind of match everything together. So the first thing I'm going to say, anything that is percussion based, drums, loops, is going to go to A, return track A. Okay. So I select that, drums and loops, and I turn up send A. Now I'm going to look through the rest of my set and see if there's anything percussion related. That's it. Okay. So all percussion stuff goes there. Next, let's say in the synth effects thing, I'd have to listen to this to know if this is more keys or bass or loop stuff. Let's pretend it's loop stuff. Okay. So let's include that as well too. Next, and we can label these return tracks just so we can keep track of what we're doing here. We'll call this percussion. Okay. Our next thing, let's make this bass. Okay. So this is all low end bass stuff. So I'm going to select this track, hold shift to select our next one. We'll bring up B. So that's going to map all our bass stuff. Then I'm going to take all of my guitar stuff. Okay, I'm going to select these because there's like 5,000 guitars. We're going to bring up C. So acoustic guitar all the way to electric guitar 9. And we're going to call these guitars. And then I'm left here with piano through keys and vocals. I'm going to just take all of this. I'm going to send this to D. So I'm going to treat this kind of as like keys / aux. Okay. Now for the sake of my template, I have 4 return tracks. But if I was you, I would maybe create another return track and say, okay, let's make this, separate our key stuff from our aux stuff or our vocals stuff. And what's great about sends and return tracks, and I said I wasn't going to go deep into this, but I'll show you at least one thing that's cool, is by me committing to different return track groups, I'm not committing to a number of outputs. So having 4 return tracks doesn't mean I'm using 4 outputs, because I could take all of these return tracks and I could map all of these audio to external out 1 and 2, right? Or we took our click and guide and made them 1. I can make all of these 2. But what I'm doing is providing groupings here so that if I ever do want to go from, let's say, a 2 output scenario where click and guide are left, everything else is on the right. If I ever want to go from that to a 8 output scenario, then I could go through and route all of these and say, let's instead of go 1 and 2, Let's see. I think I have my Play Audio 12 still connected here. Yeah, perfect. Instead of that, let's go to my Play Audio 12. We've got enough outputs set up here, which is great. And I could then now route this and say, here's 3 and 4, here's 5 and 6, here's 7 and 8, here's 9 and 10. And what's great about that change is I'm going to change that at my live set level, not in my file. And I'm not touching these tracks at all. Okay. So, again, I said I wasn't going to go into this. I apologize. But for now, I'm going to set all of these back to master. Okay. I'm just using return tracks to group these, add as many return tracks as you want. But the super important thing is, make sure the amount of return tracks in your songs match the amount of return tracks in your template. So I have 4 in the free tracks template. I think I have 8 in the advanced tracks template, if I remember correctly. But however many you have, stick to that. Add all 12 if you want to, and only use the ones that you want. But make sure the amount of return tracks in your song match the amount of return tracks in your template. Okay, final thing here. So we've got all these tracks routed to return tracks. Final thing I need to do is on this track here, change this from audio to master. This is super important. I just did a one-on-one session with someone a couple weeks ago where they were missing this one step and it was causing their audio to kind of do all sorts of crazy things. So what I'm going to do is go to audio 2 and change this to sends only. And what that means is I get individual separation and outputs because I'm using my sends to send to return tracks. And each of my return tracks could be separate outputs or they could be master. But in addition to that, by making this group track audio 2 sends only, I also get a master volume for this song. So if this overall song is super loud, then I can click here and say -5. That brings down the overall level of my song, but keeps all my separate routings to my return track. So finally with that, I'm going to hit save. And with that, 46 minutes in, we have formatted a multi-track session. Now, I did mention at the beginning, this would be efficient and you're going, Will, is it going to take me 46 minutes every single song? No, I talked way too much, but I talked through it. I went super slow, showed you details step by step. What I do when I format songs and when I format multi-tracks sessions, but I did that to teach you and show you. When I'm doing this in real time, it takes me anywhere from 2 to 5 minutes to format a song. And here's the beauty of that. You do that one time. I formatted this song once just now. I never have to reformat this. I never have to come back and do it. Now I could come back and add to it, right? If you were to look at my basic tracks template here or my advanced tracks template, you'll see that there's a lot more things in here. Okay, basic tracks looks pretty much the same, but I do have a MIDI click. I do have a MIDI guide player. But if you look at advanced tracks template, there's a lot of things here, a lot of different tracks, right? If I format my song once, I could always come back and add that extra stuff to it, but I don't have to redo the foundational thing. The foundational structure stays the same, but I could add a little icing on top if I wanted. I could add a repeat track. I could add a dynamic guide cue track if I wanted. But if we get this foundation right, what that's going to mean is when we move to the final step, which is where we actually build a set, this song is formatted and it's ready to use. So bear with me. We're going to go through a couple more tutorials. Next week, we'll talk about formatting loop community songs, and we'll talk about formatting praise chart songs this way. And then we'll talk about a few other places, potential sources where we talk about formatting songs. And then our final step in this process is to build a set using all this content. When I get to that video, I'll add links throughout all of this. We got a lot of links coming, but the goal of this is so that we can do this in a way that gives us freedom and flexibility, and do it in a way that's efficient and stable. And I've found in years and years of doing this, this is the most stable, efficient way I've found that also gives me all of that freedom and flexibility. So again, as a reminder, if you want that tracks template that we've been working with through this entire video to format your content, head to FromStudioToStage.com/template. You can also see all the other free tracks resources that we have there that will help you use tracks in a way that gives you freedom and flexibility and in a way that's efficient and stable. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next week as we continue this theme of formatting content for our worship service. And again, we'll go individual songs. Next week, we'll look at formatting content from Loop Community. And then eventually, once we go through a few of these, we'll build a worship set, all from different sources, but it's all going to feel consistent. We're going to be able to do this really, really quickly. So thanks for following along. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next week. Take care, everybody. Bye.